Good morning to everyone. I think that we can start with the seminar. It's a real pleasure to have all of you here. It's the first seminar of 2024 of our institute. We have the pleasure to have Claudio Morana from the University of Milano, Bicocca, that will present a paper that is co-authored with Nuno Cassola from the University of Lisbon and Elisa Ossola from the University of Milano Bicocca. Claudio is professor of economics at the Department of Economics Management and Statistics. He has a huge amount of title among several associations and several board, and his research is really centered. Present research is centered on the transition policy and effect of this transition policy. Today, he will present the paper "Green Risk in Europe" that tackle the problem of the green transition from a different point of view, seeing if the how this element of this policy of green transition could have same side effect from the economic point of view. I will leave the floor to Claudio, and thank you, and that I want to thank you for this seminar. Please, Claudio.
Thank you very much for the invitation, for introduction. So this paper is about green risk in Europe and is jointly authored with Nuno Cassola and Elisa Ossola. So climate change. Climate change poses two main challenges. First of all, mitigation. Mitigation has to do with how we can attempt to contain the anthropogenic origin of climate change. That means greenhouse gases emission. The other challenge is adaptation. Adaptation has to do with ways that we can follow in order to enhance the resilience of our economies and societies to the implication of climate change. So successful mitigation then implies implementation or changes into governmental policies, agents' behavior, and also technological breakthrough. On the other hand, adaptation is challenged by the way we can try to face the undesirable effects of climate change in terms of disruptions, extreme disruption coming from environmental changes. Extreme weather episodes are an example of this disruption, and it is getting more and more evident that these extreme weather episodes can be further amplified as environmental change proceeds, as particularly in relation to passing certain threshold that are known as tipping points. Different sources of risk follows from these two paths. Transition risk follows from mitigation. Physical risk is what is faced along an adaptation path. In both cases, there are potentially very large implications for financial markets and also real economic activity in relation of the two to negative implication. So output losses and stranded assets and financial losses. It appears then that significant public and private investment may be needed in order to face successfully both type of risks. There is a major difficulty in implementing successful public policies in relation to both adaptation and mitigation. This difficulty is related to the so-called tragedy of the horizon. So the issue here is that while green transition costs are evident in the short term, their benefits are only becoming visible in the medium to long term. So it's very difficult to achieve public support for policies that have clear short-term negative impacts, while the benefits of these policies will become evident just at a later stage. Because of this, then aligning financial markets activity with the needed policy and regulatory changes is becoming key to foster an orderly transition to a carbon-free economy. And we have good examples in terms of this attempt. One has to think, for instance, to the EU taxonomy, which is part of the European Green Deal strategy proposal. The EU taxonomy provides an effective guide for firms, investors, and policymakers on how to direct funds and investments towards projects that are likely to foster and promote green transition. Consistent with all this, then there is the key questions that is also the key focus on this paper, is whether or not financial markets are currently pricing green risk. And this is a question, obviously, at the heart of an emerging new strand of finance literature, so-called climate finance. And there are some approaches that have been followed in this literature in order to attempt to answer these questions. And we can highlight three different type of approaches. First of all, there are studies which have been using some firm level measure of greenness or brownness, such as, for instance, carbon footprints or other indicators to construct long-short portfolios that might provide indication concerning the environmental risk exposition of economic activities. Other approaches have used directly this carbon footprint measure in asset pricing frameworks, and other approaches have, on the other hand, relied on some measure of climate change concern by investors in order to assess the sensitivity of financial markets to news or changes to public perception on evolving climatic risk. There are substantially two types of results concerning the key questions about whether or not green investment provide a hedge for environmental risk. Some studies have found evidence of a positive carbon premium. This is consistent with the fact that brown stocks are stocks that are facing higher climate transition risk, and therefore they should command higher expected return. And there are some studies that provide evidence supporting these hypotheses. Some consistent evidence find evidence of a negative green premium. So green stocks provide a hedge against the climatic risk, and therefore they command a lower expected return. And there are other results that we see just are apparently in contrast with this the previous mentioned evidence that points to positive green premium, therefore overperformance of green over brown stocks. Okay, so it's not necessarily in contradiction with the other findings in relation to negative green premium, for instance, of positive carbon premium. Insofar one takes into account that major policy challenge can create also a change in investor preference, and therefore create a temporarily excess demand for certain categories of assets in this respect, green assets, and therefore explain through excess demand effect a positive green premium. Now, this is very much where we are starting from with for our paper. What are the contributions of the paper? There are three key contributions. First of all, we provide a filtered version of the green factor proposed by Alessi, Ossola, and Pansica in 2023. This green factor return is this green factor is constructed as a portfolio that goes long in green stocks and short in brown stocks. And the ordering of the stocks within these for the construction of this portfolio is not just based on greenness, but also on size along the Fama-French tradition. So we start from this factor return, and we propose a filtered version of this factor. So the idea here is that this measure of excess performance or overperformance of green versus brown stocks may not only reflect the expositions of assets to environmental risk, but may also reflect other sources of risk. So other sources of systematic risk, as such, the exposition of to major sources of macro financial fluctuation, exposition to business cycle fluctuation, for instance, or exposition to financial cycle fluctuations, or exposition to economic policy changes. So this is why we, as a first step, we assess whether or not the green factor return truly reflects just the exposition to environmental risk, or on the other hand, reflect other sources of systematic risk, which we decompose and disentangle in relation to the horizon that with which these sources of risk may impact on the portfolio return. So we think of the composition of the green factor return into a trend or medium to long-term component, a cyclical or short-term component. and obviously our residual portion, which is then providing a measure of the component of the factor return, which is truly, hopefully, related to environmental risk. Now, in considering these medium-term and short-term dimension, we rely on previous work of mine, where a trend cycle decomposition is proposed. This decomposition is parametric and time domain, and is very much inspired by the same philosophical grounding of the IRCrES filter, insofar as the composition is not based on statistical properties of the DGP of the data, but on stylized facts concerning the sources of macrofinancial fluctuations. So the key sources are acknowledged to the financial cycle, which shows for industrialized countries since the 80s, on average, periodicity between 15 to 20 years. This is according to stylized facts established by Claudio Morana at the BIS and his co-authors in a number of papers. And the other source of fluctuation is the business cycle, and the evidence here is concerning periodicity induced by business cycle fluctuations of between 5 and 7 years, and more recently up to 10 years, according to recent results by Builder and Portier. So financial cycle and business cycle are therefore responsible for macro financial fluctuation at different horizons, and therefore nicely fit our understanding of this decomposition. I will, as I will mention later, apart from financial cycle and business cycle, there are also some other interesting factors which are relevant to account for trend behavior of the green factor return and the cyclical behavior of the green factor return. I will get back to this at a later stage. So first contribution then is focus on start from this long-short portfolio, and then filter out from this portfolio the sources of systematic risk which are known not to be related to environmental risk. And this is then in order to get out of this filtering a more accurate, hopefully, measure of the exposition to green risk. We then carry out our empirical analysis considering a large sample of stocks for the European stock market. We have over 3,600 stocks that are assessed. We focus our analysis both at the individual stocks level and also at the aggregate sectorial level. We consider an AC decomposition, categorization into 14 sectors. And as a key result, we find evidence of a negative pricing of our filtered green factor return for firms and activities which are known to belong to high carbon brown sectors. And the third contribution then is built on our asset pricing analysis. And we know that despite growing incentives for firms to disclose their environmental information, there are still large number of them that are actually non-transparent, and it may be therefore useful for these companies to try to work out an implied measure of green score. And we propose in this paper as a third contribution a very simple and viable approach which exploit our asset pricing results and establish a mapping between the exposition to environmental risk of a firm and the actual and implied green scores. Okay, so I'll start to showing some results. I'll start with then make more clear what are the data that we are using. So we use monthly stock returns from January 2006 through August 2022. We have 3,670 companies listed on the main European stock markets. We exclude, as usual, financial firms and penny stocks from our sample. Environmental data, we use environmental scores provided by Bloomberg on an annual basis. And we also use measure of emission intensities, such as the carbon footprint, given by total greenhouse gas emission in levels or as a ratio over firms' revenues. Concerning macro-financial information, I was mentioning before the exposition of the stocks to financial and business cycle. What we do is to consider the a set of 8 factors, macro-financial factors, that carry information concerning financial cycle and the demand side and supply side dimension of the business cycle, in addition to information on management of monetary and fiscal policy, investor preference changes, and as well as supply side, evolving supply side conditions. These 8 macro financial factors are contributed in a previous paper of mine. So we rely on this set of factors whose derivation and interpretation is carefully explained in the paper. And we have also other environmental data that we consider. We construct a Google Trend-based measure of climate change concern, and we use the E3CI index, so the European Extreme Events Climate Index, to provide indications or to account for evolving physical risk. These E3CI index are available at the country level and provide comprehensive information on evolving climate change along with several dimensions, for instance, accounting for cold and heat stress, droughts, heavy precipitation, wildfires, intense winds, and storms, and hail. And we work out aggregates by PCA, and particularly the first factor that we extract from the international cross-section of this indicator provides a measure of European indicator for evolving climatic change conditions, and there are actually 4 factors that are extracted from this E3CI set, and the other 3 components are informative climate change risk differentials across geographical areas, for instance, continental versus non-continental Europe, North versus South Europe, East versus West Europe. Now, I would like to speed up a bit. I will not provide the major, say, detailed explanation how the Alessi, also Lampanzica green factor return is constructed. Let me just give you a few hints. First of all, the portfolio entails the evaluation of excess performance of green versus brown stocks. So the first point is how the greenness of a company can be assessed. And I mentioned the use of two types of information. For disclosing firm, a Bloomberg or other rating agency environmental score is available, and obviously can exploit that information. It's also available for disclosing firms measure of their carbon footprint in terms of greenhouse gases emissions, for instance, or CO2 emissions. So what we do is to construct an average indicator of greenness, which take into account these two sources of information on firms' characteristics. And you see that the average indicator is constructed as a weighted average of the inverse of the ranking of a given firm in terms of emission intensity and the ranking that the firm obtained from the Bloomberg score. We use equal weight in our implementation, so gamma is set to 0.5. This indicator is further normalized to take into account for the number of transparent companies in a given year, and for scale again in order to take values between 0 and 100. The higher is the value of the score, and the greener is the company. So the idea then is to focus on the greenest companies within this set, and that is the top 20% of these transparent and green firms, and then to further order them according to size. As you see, the construction of the portfolio then requires focusing on the average of the term according to the size, small, medium, and large companies. And a similar procedure is followed concerning the brown stocks, but then categorization of these stocks is proceeding based on the information on the climate policy relevant sectors. We consider particular sectors that are well known to show the highest environmental impact, so fossil fuels, utility, energy intensive, and transport, following the Battlestone classification. Okay, just some evidence on how our portfolio looks like. The green factor portfolio looks like. This is still the unfiltered, so it's not what we are working in our asset pricing analysis, but it's the factor that we further filter in order to remove systematic sources of systematic risk. You see the time series plotted over time. of this monthly green factor return, and light gray shades in the plot correspond to periods of financial stress, and dark gray shades correspond to periods of economic recession. So you can notice here this financial crisis period and the Great Recession associated with it, and then the sovereign debt crisis and the recession that ensued from it a pandemic recession, and the last part of the sample corresponds to the current geopolitical crisis. It's quite evident the fact that green stocks appear to have been overperforming brown stocks in the period of economic and financial distress, particularly during the
Sorry, Claudio, it's okay.
Okay, so I'm not sure whether I should repeat the comment to this. I don't know when I was muted. Anyway, I'm not sure, so I will just repeat.
No, just a few seconds. Don't worry.
Okay, so just a highball inspection, you see, showed that green stocks seems to have overperformed brown stocks in some key period of economic and financial distress, particularly during the sovereign debt crisis, but also we see also during the Great Recession. But this is not the case during the pandemic recession. It's actually the other way around. There is some evidence of performance then in the recovery from the pandemic recession. If you look at the, if you smooth out these returns, you construct a year-on-year return. So previous evidence becomes even more evident. So overperformance of green versus brown stocks in periods of economic and financial distress, but not during the pandemic recession. Okay, so I have to speed up a bit. So the first step then is to filter out from these green factor return sources of systematic risk. So the idea is then, let me show you what we do. So what we do is to simply set up a PC regression where the green factor return is then regress on a number of macro financial factors which are relevant to account for the two dimensions of euro area macro financial fluctuation, the medium to long term and the short term. So you can see that the starting specification consider four factors accounting for medium to long term fluctuation and four factors accounting for short term fluctuation. So the first issue is how to disentangle medium to long term and short term fluctuation. So the disentangling is based on stylized facts concerning the properties of the financial and the business cycle. So the different periodicity that I was mentioning before. These factors are coming from a previous paper of mine where I focus, among the other issues, on the features that characterize the macro finance interface in the euro area. So these factors are estimated through a two-step approach. We started from a large set of variables described in the macro finance interface for the euro area. So in the study, I used 28 variables, provide an accurate description of real activity, production, and labor market, prices, interest rates, financial markets returns, financial stress measures, measure of revision in expectations by market-based measure of revision expectations. So a comprehensive set of variables. This comprehensive set of variables then is the basis for the extraction of these factors. First of all, a trend cycle decomposition is performed on each of these two series, and then principal components analysis is used to estimate commonalities from the set of medium-term term or trend components and the set of short-term or cyclical components. So I cannot provide here details on the procedure I'm following because of lack of time. The procedure is based on two papers of mine previously contributed that have been recently published. Okay, so the issue. Yes. Okay, so the issue then is, what are these factors? I was mentioning before financial cycle and the business cycle. Okay, concerning the medium to long term macro financial fluctuation drivers, first of all, a key driver is the financial cycle. And here you can see a representation of it. So this is the first principal component, which is extracted from a comprehensive set of medium-term components of macro financial variable for the euro area. You can see that almost two complete cycles have occurred since the euro area inception, the first peak in the mid-2000, and it is still unclear whether the second cycle has peaked just after the pandemic recession. These components account for 40 to 70% of variance of housing pricing, and the new KES financial condition index also accounts for 20% of output variance. The other two components that account for medium to long term macro financial fluctuation in the euro area are informative of monetary policy and fiscal policy management. The monetary policy factor accounts for 50% of real short-term rate variance, and also for a large proportion of credit variance. The fiscal policy factor accounts for 25% of fiscal deficit and unemployment rate variance, and 5% of output and inflation variance. Interestingly, you can see a changing regime in monetary policy management by ECB from a relatively tight policy regime to a relatively loose policy regime, and the transition happens across the two major financial crises that hit the euro area. And evidence of counter-cyclical policy management is shown for both policies. I don't have time really to focus on these standardized facts. I just want anyway to show you what are these macro financial factors, and the last two that are deemed to be relevant for our analysis related to the supply side component of the business cycle and the short-term financial factors. Now, so these components then other components are included in the regression and then used in the first step filtering procedure. So the filtering in the end is just based on the estimation of this PC regression and the filtered green factor is delivered by as the residual, the OLS residual we get out of this regression. I mentioned just a subset of the macro financial factors. This subset is the one relevant to account for the green factor return variance. So first of all, this PC regression is accounting for over 60% of the green factor return variance. So this is the first important aspect. So the issue is the green factor return not only reflects potentially exposition to environmental risk, but reflects also, and very sizably, also exposition to sources, well-known sources of systematic risk. And obviously not only significance, also the sign of these systematic coefficient is relevant. And in this case, we can see that the green investment appear to have provided a edge for medium-term and short-term financial fluctuation, as well as edge versus business cycle fluctuation. And also appears that green return are negatively affected by a monetary policy tightening and are positively affected by a fiscal policy expansion. So this is the clear, what to say, very much the endpoint of the information we can get out of the systematic risk modeling. Okay, so let me show you how this decomposition then looks like. So just what we do then, we get the decomposition of the green factor return into a trend, a cyclical, and the residual component. This trend component is related to the financial cycle, as I mentioned. It's related also to monetary fiscal policy management. And the cyclical component is related to business cycle, supply side component, and the short-term financial factor. And then we have the residual. So here you see then the green factor return is the dashed line versus the medium to long-term component. And sorry, you'll see the demeaned green factor return versus the estimated cyclical component. And finally, what we get for the filtered green factor return. So here we see the plot of the mean green factor return dashed versus the estimated residual, that is the our filtered green factor return. And it's very interesting here to notice how these environmental risk measure then account for excess the performance of green versus brown stocks during the sovereign debt crisis, and again during the recovery, particularly from the pandemic recession. But it's also interesting to notice how the evidence pointed to underperformance of green versus brown investment during the most recent period, during the geopolitical crisis, and possibly this as reflecting some uncertainties concerning the implementation of the green transition given the changing constraints imposed by the geopolitical evolving situation. Now, the point is this then, this filter return truly reflecting exposition of environmental risk? Because so far we have made this claim. Obviously, we made this claim because empirical evidence is supporting this interpretation, but I still have to show you the empirical evidence that allow us to relate exposition to environmental risk to this filter green factor return. What you find here is simply the regression that we have been using to get to assess these hypotheses. What we try to do is to explain the filtered green factor return on the basis of some measure of physical risk and also of evolving climate change concern. So our conditioning regressors that are these X variables, and we have 5 conditioning regressors in our specification, refer to, first of all, the local trend measure of evolving climate change concern. And secondly, the remaining 4 factors are provided by our PC analysis of the E3CI indexes. So, first of all, the European measure of evolving physical risk, and then the 3 other measures of evolving physical risk in relation to spread, geographical spreads. So we have then in our explanatory variable set 5 variables that provide a comprehensive account of evolving climate change concern and also evolving physical risk. And we also allow for a changing impact over time of these conditioning variables onto the pricing of environmental risk. Particularly, we consider 2 step dummy variables to account for the effects of the launch of the Paris Agreement in December 2015 and the launch of the Green Deal in December 2019. So you see then that these regressors are then interact with these control dummy variables. Okay, so just briefly show you some evidence. First of all, this regression accounts for about 50% of the variance of the filtered green factor return. So we are able to sizably account for the evolution of this filtered green factor return on the basis of this measure of climate change concern and evolving climate environmental physical risk, about 50%. And just briefly a summary of the finding. So what we find, and there are 2 key findings. First of all, there is evidence that investors have hedged the increasing climatic concern, particularly since the launch of the Green Deal strategy. And similarly, we find evidence of hedging of physical risk, of evolving and increasing physical risk since the launch of the Green Deal strategy. We also find evidence of potentially contribution from excess demand or environmental or green stocks to overperformance of green versus brown stocks again since the launch of the Green Deal strategy. So there is evidence then that the green factor return, the filtered green factor return, indeed reflects evolving perception about the climate change risk and evolving physical risk, and that this impact of this evolving risk component has got particularly evident since the launch of the Green Deal strategy. Now, I have to move to the asset pricing analysis and then conclude. So what we do next is to try to assess the key question in the paper. Is then environmental risk priced in the stock market? And what we do is focusing on industry level and the individual stock level data. We do it within a standard asset pricing model, unconditional asset pricing model. We use a five-factor Fama French model, which is augmented by the filtered green factor. And obviously, all the focus of our asset pricing analysis then is on this beta I6 loading. And let me show you some industry level results first, and then some individual stocks level results after. So we have considered a NACE sectorial decomposition. We have 14 sectors, therefore 14 regressions in our asset pricing analysis. The parameters of interest is the one that correspond to the filter green factor return. As general finding, we find the negative pricing of environmental risk in the sector, which are well known to be brown and high carbon sectors, and agriculture, forest and fishing, mining and quarrying, electricity, gas, steam, air conditioning supply, again, water supply, constructions. But statistically significant negative impact is only found for mining and quarrying. We have some say surprising results for manufacturing. Issue here is that manufacturing is very broad sector, so it's clearly this impact, positive impact, something that has to do with the categorization of this sector, which is too broad. Individual stock analysis, here we find, I will show you a summary of it. So we have again our 14 sectors, and I report here the box plot pertaining to the distribution of the beta 6 parameters that have been obtained from our large set of individual stocks. And again, in terms of median impact, you can see a negative median impact for the sectors which are most well known to be high carbon brown sector. So individual stock analysis is consistent with the finding that we get for the aggregate industry level analysis. Now, as I was mentioning, what we do as a third contribution to this paper is then to provide a simple regression-based, market-based tool to rate the non-disclosing companies. Ideally, this procedure should be very simple to be implemented, reliable, industry-specific, and effective. And it seems that exploiting the mapping between the betas of the green factor return and the average score that is available for the disclosing firm is a simple and viable procedure to get an implied value for the average score for the non-disclosing firm. So what we do is, first of all, to estimate the linkage, the regression, which provide the linkage between the exposition of a disclosing firm to environmental risk to their average green score. And this is done controlling for industry effects. You see, industry effects are here taken into account as in as the level and slope components are interacted according to sectorial level. And parameters G and GJ and BJ are then estimated based on available information for disclosing firm. And next, these parameters are used in another mapping that we can then establish to work out an implied measure, also a fitted measure or expected predicted measure for the average green score for non-disclosing firm, exploiting information that we do have that concern their risk exposition to environmental risk. So the beta 6 parameter is obviously available for both disclosing and non-disclosing firm. What we do not have for non-disclosing firm is the average green score. So we work out an implied measure of the average green score by exploiting the information we have on the environmental risk exposure and using sectorial information concerning the mapping that we have been establishing for the disclosing set of firms. I conclude with showing some evidence for what we get concerning the non-disclosing firms in terms of, again, on distribution of the average green score for the non-disclosing firms reported here for the various sectors that we consider for the mapping exercise, and compared to what we get for the disclosing firms. The findings are consistent, and there is less variability, obviously, as we can expect for the non-disclosing firm. As I mentioned before, possibly this approach may benefit of a finer sectorial grouping of companies, both our asset pricing analysis and also this further implementation of the market-based proceed. Now, in the paper, there is a lot of robustness analysis. I think I will just jump over these results. Let me just say that the composition of the green factor return into different components which reflect exposition to systematic risk is not something that is peculiar just to our green versus brown stock portfolio. Obviously, there is a growing literature in climate finance, and there are related contributions by, for instance, Gimeno and Gonzalez, 2022, and also another paper by Bauer and Portos, 2023. And we have been decomposing also their green factor return portfolios, and we find similar evidence of an important component in this factor return to be accounted by exposition to systematic risk, such as financial cycle and business cycle risk. So the findings are strongly robust to how the green factor return is computed. It's also strongly robust on how the environmental information is used in the construction of the green factor return, and also the asset price and results analysis are robust to the different assumptions that we've been using in the execution of our analysis. All details obviously are in the paper. So I will just move to the conclusion. In this paper, we assess the prices of green risk in the European stock market. We find, first of all, that accurate measurement of green risk within a set of portfolios which are constructed going long in green stocks and short and brown stocks might require the filtering out of the contribution of factors to the systematic risks, such as those related to business and financial cycles, and also economic policy. We find strong evidence that the filtering yield a more accurate measure for exposition to environmental risk, and we will find pricing of evolving and increasing climate change concern, and evolving and increasing physical risk in the stock market, and this particularly since the launch of the Green Deal strategy. We find negative pricing of this risk in the sectors and stocks which belongs to sectors that are well known to be more carbon intensive and therefore more brown. And finally, we propose a simple and viable market-based regression tool to measure the implied green score for non-transparent and non-disclosing firms. And in the paper, we also assess the condition under which this simple procedure may work best.
Okay.
Thank
you, Claudio. Thank you for your interesting presentation. Thank you to be so clear and for this clear and complete presentation of your work. I want to introduce Marco Marucci, a researcher of our institute that will discuss briefly your paper. Please, Marco.
Nice to meet you. Thank you. Thanks to Professor Morana for presenting this interesting paper. Let me introduce the discussion with a short description of European policies of this issue on sustainable finance, just to better understand how robust analysis like this can contribute to drive those investment, and in particular in financial markets, towards more sustainable assets. The aim of these policies is to promote more investment in green and transparent companies, so trying to change also their production system in the real economy and to avoid the greenwashing. As you mentioned before, the starting point maybe is the Paris Agreement of 2015. In the same year, we have the United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and there is a starting point to relaunch the debate on climate change. And you mentioned also the European Green Deal of December 2019. This is a sort of white paper with lots of good intentions, the reduction of greenhouse gases emissions, green jobs, well-being, and so on. 1 year before, we also had the European Action Plan on financing sustainable growth, and a few months later, the Sustainable Finance Package, that is the wide European program providing a lot of regulation that was published between 2019 and 2021. Some of these regulations are very important, like the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation that addresses the financial intermediaries and financial advisors to give more information to small investors on sustainable hedge funds. And other are the Climate Benchmark Regulation of 2019, with the aim of reducing emission of carbon dioxide, respecting of the ESG criteria. And then what you mentioned, the European Taxonomy Regulation, that is the regulation that tries to classifying activities with a scientific approach, the activities that have to give a substantial contribution to climate change, or just respect the principle of do no significa harm that we analyze later, but basically is do not damage natural resources and biodiversity. Then we have other regulations of secondary importance. And after 2021, we have an upgrading of this strategy of sustainable finance package with the new strategy for financing the transition to a sustainable economy. And we have the regulation on the European Green Bond Standard, financial assets to promote social and environmental projects. In 2021, we also have the design approach to launch the Ecolabel for retail financial products. It is a sort of green label certification for sustainable activities, and an important directive that is the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive that is in charge by 23 of January. And it aimed to report also social and environmental impact of big company, the strictly connected with the non-financial reporting directive. And at the end, I think we're still discussing in these days in the European Commission the due diligence directive that imposes to firms to respect the human rights and environment. And last but not least, the application of the significant harm from the European taxonomy is in charge also in the National Resilience and Recovery Program in European Union, what we call the Recovery and Resilience Facility, because it introduced the respect of the significant harm principle for all those firms who want to access this public fund. And the principle that you explained was about the mitigation of climate change, the reduction of emission of carbon dioxide, and adaptation to climate change, not damage the climate and the natural ecosystem. I think this gave a real impact on behaviors and attitudes on firms, because firms that want to access public funds now, they have to demonstrate how they respect these principles. So I think that 2021 is another starting point of this real change. I think we can find maybe some of these effects in the business cycle that you mentioned, not only the 2019 when started the Green Deal program. And this is just to introduce why I really appreciate your contribution, because first of all, it focuses on very current issues, as it aims to build an alternative tools to estimate the green rate based on financial market data. And this should be useful in absence of official data on green and SG rating to scientists, but also to policy makers. I am curious to...
Tu ti ricordi che ce n'era Green Risk in Europe?
There is some... Okay. Okay, I was saying that I was curious to know if it's possible a rank of Italian firms based on your estimation to publish, to really let's make a change, just publishing the list and allow the people to know the most performing ones. I don't know if it's possible, but should be very, very interesting for me. Second, it identifies the grassroots bias of this adaptation process. That is what you said in the introduction. The financial services believe in economists, not in climatologists. So the asset and the stock prices don't reflect the real potential climate risk. This is the real problem, and what you call also the brown premium. Third, we could evaluate what is your descriptive analysis, but really it's policy evaluation exercise, because we could evaluate the first effects of this severe European regulation, like non-financial direct reporting directive, European taxonomy, and so on. This I think we can measure that on the supply side area, for example, the introduction of taxonomy in 2021 and their effects on the performance of these prices of stocks markets. Finally, fourth, it reflects on contrasting results of measuring the green and the climate risk, in particular with the ESG rating of different agencies. And so I'm also curious to know which rating agencies do you consider at building your transparency factor, because I know the rating of many international agencies differs far, very, very. The rating is very different between several international rating agencies. Let's jump to the open question. The first of all is an overall consideration based on the fact that still several firms don't respect the ESG criteria, or not, they are not giving disclosure about that. So the main topic maybe is the green transition costs burdened by companies and firms. In one hand, we we have the need of public funds to implement policies that avoid market shocks. We have an example these days of drug demonstration that it reflects on effectiveness of national recovery plan that should support this green transition. But maybe we should ask ourselves, are there insufficient funds for these real needs? Or what didn't work about this? Because the national recovery plan that should support this green transition of European firms and of European industrial sectors. So maybe there is something that is not working so well. And related to this, also the importance of timing in a complex policy. The effective incentives should arrive before the obligation and penalties. This is a theme addressed also by Andrew Abbott that published Time Matters in 2001. And another example given is the automotive sector and the lobbyists against the production of electric cars by 2035. Someone of you maybe remember this political debate. So arriving to the reflection focus on the paper, and they are related on the framework you presented of financial cycle and business cycles, and you quoted in your president your previous work of 2022. I think that should be interesting comparing these cycles with levels of household, the small investors rate of savings and investment. I suppose that they affect the demand side of the financial asset, but should be interesting to demonstrate the real compliance between these measures. Also following the law, the works are of Barba Pivet in 2009, Lewin, Epstein, and the others. So the correlation between household savings and investment level and the performance of these financial markets. Second, we could also compare your result with some recent analysis on the voluntary European alcohol alert that I explained before for retail financial products to see if there is some point of connection. I'm not studying them, but I know there is a recent work of Mazzacurati and the report of the European Security and Market Authority. So to see if the eco-label and the financial products are following the same dynamics of the stocks market you analyzed. And another sort of curiosity, the returns and excess return that you calculated is calculated by earning per stocks indicator or other type of returns, because it should be also a more speculative gain calculated, for example, by difference of stock prices during a time frame. The last final suggestion, very general, is maybe the paper, as I read it, is a little bit complex. So you manage in a while a framework designing using historical data on different dimensions, business cycle, financial cycles. An indicator of greenness and transparency X returns, filtered, unfiltered, and its trend over time, also with the green factor and green risk. An assessment of stock market responses to green risk, that one based on French model, by industry sector, and the market-based rating tool for non-transparent film, and so maybe, I don't know, it could be useful also to spread the audience of this technical, very professional contribution by splitting the analysis into contribution more accessible. For example, one on the framework to build a green risk tool, and one more focused on its application at firm level. So this is just a final suggestion. I finished. I give the floor for other technical and statistical questions, and thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you very much for your comments. Shall we collect other questions, or shall I?
If you want to answer to the comments, and meanwhile, if the
So,
audience,
I mean, you made a lot of comments, so it's not so straightforward now to answer to each of them. But anyway, let me start from the first one. You mentioned about the possibility of working out a ranking for Italian companies, and obviously based on the implied indicators. And the answer is yes. Yes, it would be straightforward to do it. It can be done, for both disclosing and non-disclosing firms. Then you were mentioning the fact that say financial investor trusts economist assessment, that they are not that concerned with information coming from climatologists, scientists. Well, then one should think of how economists then are basing their own assessment of the impact of climate on the economy and the financial markets. And it is undoubtful that the economists do rely on scientific assessment made by climatologists, and so people working on climate econometrics, for instance, assessing the data properties of environmental series and indicators, necessarily have to rely on knowledge coming from climate science and other scientific assessment. So I would not be too worried on this aspect, as either directly or indirectly scientific information about climate change evolution is taken into account. There is also a growing, how to say, spread of scientific information that has proceeded through several media. Both, let's say, electronic sources possibly, and also non-electronic sources, but maybe through electronic sources, the spreading of information has surely increased over time, and awareness has also increased over time. Yeah, there's a paper of mine, this paper joined with Donatella Bayard, where we investigate the determinants of climate change awareness and its evolution over time for the euro area. And this awareness is also, relate to the spreading of information about scientific information about evolving climatic condition. You made other many other interesting comments. I think I don't know whether
Maybe the first curiosity, but for me, it's just curiosity, but it's very important. It's really possible to have a rank of the single firms that you analyzed, or I don't know, maybe it's
yes,
it's
yes.
not.
I mean, the results I show
published.
you, well, for the risk, say the green score rating tool, I show you aggregate results, but these aggregate results are based on individual stocks information. So yes, it is straightforward to not only possible, but it's straightforward also to construct this implied index for, you know, any set of individual stocks you like.
Okay, just to know the best one and the worst one, for example, in Italy, should be interesting to have this data.
Yes, it could
Maybe
be
extracting by fiscal, I think, the fiscal code, if you have it.
well.
Okay.
Say now, I mean, based on our we have a comprehensive sample of data, but concerning the country contribution, we should look into it. I mean, I should look into it, as I haven't been concerned with let's say the stock market data myself in the construction of the data set. So this is very much information that Elisa has. But anyway, yes, we could work out.
Okay, thank you.
Within our sample, what are the best and the greenest and the brownest.
Okay. We have any other question from the audience? Come on, don't be shy. It's the moment to for the question. I had a comment, but it was coincident with the one that Marco presented, so you have already answered to my comment. So if there is any other question from the audience, we can. Okay. We are at the end of our seminar. I want just to thank Claudio Morana for his presentation, and I want just to thank Marco Marucci for comment for the discussion. I want to thank all the other for the participation to the seminar. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you to the next seminar. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for again for the invitation and the comments. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.